Meet, this is Holly Bobo, a 20-year-old girl from Tennessee who was on the brink of a new life. She was about to finish her studies and dedicate herself to the noble profession of nursing. It seemed like nothing could overshadow her future until one April day in 2011, she vanished without a trace. Her brother was the last person to see Holly alive. According to him, he witnessed a strange scene. Holly was talking to an unknown man in their home's garage. This stranger, whose face remains in the shadows to this day, grabbed the girl and forcibly took her to the nearest forest. I can only imagine the horror that gripped Holly at that moment. Despite a quick call to the police, it was too late. By the time law enforcement arrived at the scene, the perpetrator had already managed to disappear with his victim. A race against time began in which, unfortunately, the criminal proved to be more cunning. Holly, a native of a quiet town, was a true child of nature. Countless photos show her in camouflage together with her family as they explore the local forests and hills. Nature was her second home. But despite her love for outdoor activities, Holly was not a very sociable person. At her core, she was rather shy and reserved. But this quiet exterior hid an unwavering inner confidence. She knew exactly who she was and what she wanted out of life. As a detective with many years of experience, I have seen many similar cases, but each story is unique and touches me in its own way. Holly's story was no exception. Holly Bobo's case became one of the most mysterious and disturbing in Tennessee's history. It touched the hearts of people across the country. Everyone asked themselves the question, what really happened to Holly on that fateful April morning, and will the truth ever be revealed? I will tell you all about it right now, but traditionally only to those wonderful and incredible people who right now will subscribe to the channel, like this video, and write any comment to promote this video. These 3 simple actions will help conscious people find and watch this video and realize what problems exist in society and what should always be paid attention to. Holly grew up in the small town of Darden, Tennessee, with a population of just over 3,000 residents. It was a quiet, cozy corner, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. An ideal place to raise children and enjoy a peaceful life. As a detective, I have seen many towns, but Darden immediately captured my heart with its simplicity and sincerity. Locals were proud that Darden was a middle-class stronghold. Crime here was at a record low, and the cost of living allowed even middle-income families to feel comfortable. All the ingredients for a happy life were in Darden: safety, tranquility, proximity to nature. No wonder Holly loved her hometown so much. But despite her devotion to Darden, Holly had ambitious plans for the future. She was studying at a college in neighboring Parsons at the University of Tennessee's Nursing Center. It was a small but cozy building where several hundred young and eager students like Holly diligently mastered the basics of medicine. Parsons, although larger than Darden, was also a fairly quiet town. But for students, everything they needed was here: quality education, a friendly atmosphere, and even a few shops where they could have fun after stressful classes. Holly felt like a fish in water here. By the way, what Holly valued most was the opportunity to escape from the noisy city life. Parsons was a quiet haven for her, where she could focus on her studies and her dreams. And although she enjoyed spending time with her family in Darden, Parsons gave her a sense of freedom and independence, so necessary for growing up. The short distance between Darden and Parsons allowed Holly to easily combine her studies and family life. She could devote time to classes without sacrificing warm family moments. It seemed like she had the perfect life: loving parents, close relationships with her brother, and a promising future. As an experienced detective, I have seen many examples of how crime can shake even the most peaceful towns. But it was hard to imagine anything bad in Darden and Parsons. But despite the apparent idyll, danger lurked very close, and when it finally struck, no one was ready. Not Holly's family, not the residents of Darden, not law enforcement. Holly's disappearance was a blow from which the town took a long time to recover. After all, if this could happen to Holly, a girl everyone knew and loved, then no one was safe. Now, looking back, it's easy to see the alarming signs. But then, in those carefree days, no one could have imagined that Holly's life was about to change forever. And with it, the lives of everyone who knew and loved her. On the fateful morning of April 13, 2011, nothing foreshadowed trouble. Holly woke up early around 4:30 to prepare for an important exam. She didn't know that this was the last normal morning of her life. The last hours of carefree existence before her world turned upside down. Around 7:30, Holly received a call from her boyfriend, Drew Scott. He had just returned from hunting turkeys in his grandparents' backyard. It was a usual morning for Drew, while for Holly it was to be a fateful one. None of them could have imagined the tragedy that was looming at the time. At that point, Holly's parents had already left for work, and her brother Clint was still sleeping in his room. The house was immersed in morning silence, which was about to be shattered by terrible events. Around 7:40, just 12 minutes after talking to Drew, Holly made her last call. She didn't know yet that these were her last minutes of freedom. From that moment on, all of Holly's calls and messages went unanswered. Drew, who was used to being in constant contact with his girlfriend, began to worry a lot. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't even imagine the scale of the tragedy. The alarm was heightened by reports from neighbors about screams coming from Holly's house. A young man who lived nearby with his parents heard the commotion and immediately called his mother, and she in turn decided to warn Holly's mother. No one could understand then that behind these screams was something much more terrible than an ordinary quarrel. As it turned out later, these calls proved to be fatal. If someone had immediately rushed to Holly's aid or called the police, perhaps the tragedy could have been avoided. But at that moment, no one could comprehend the magnitude of the danger. Every lost minute brought Holly closer to a terrible denouement. Listening to the details of this case from my colleagues, I couldn't get rid of the thought, what if someone had reacted earlier? What if someone had listened to their instincts and intervened? Maybe they wouldn't be mourning the lost life of a young girl. But the past cannot be changed. All that remains is to learn from bitter lessons and do everything to prevent such tragedies from happening again. I don't know if Holly could have been saved because, analyzing all the events, I feel like the criminal carefully planned everything. But I do know that her story shocked not only me, but also my colleagues, which is actually rare. Meanwhile, Holly's brother Clint had just woken up from the barking and growling of the family dogs. Alarmed, he jumped up to see what was going on. Running to the window, Clint saw a strange scene. Holly was talking to some stranger near the family garage. This scene immediately aroused his suspicions. Looking closer, Clint noticed that the stranger was oddly similar to Drew, Holly's boyfriend. At first, he even thought it was really Drew, but something about the situation seemed wrong. They were walking back and forth, clearly arguing about something, but Clint couldn't make out a single word. The only thing he could understand was that Holly was incredibly upset. Her voice sounded broken, but she hardly said anything. Instead, the man was talking almost the entire time, his voice tense and angry. The only thing Clint could make out was how Holly firmly said no at one point and then began asking why. While Clint was watching this scene, his mother called him. He recounted to her in detail everything he saw. Clint speculated that Holly and Drew were probably breaking up, and it was all happening in their garage. He had no idea that his sister was in danger. How bitterly he later regretted this mistake. But then Holly's mother said something that made Clint's blood run cold. It wasn't Drew. She ordered Clint to shoot the stranger immediately. Clint was shocked. He still couldn't clearly see the man, but he was sure it was Drew. How could anyone expect him to shoot his sister's boyfriend? If only Clint had realized earlier that his sister was in trouble. If only he had acted more decisively, maybe things would have turned out differently. But at that moment, he simply couldn't believe that Holly was in danger in their own home, at the hands of a person he mistook for her boyfriend. I feel sorry for how often we don't notice obvious signs of danger, because they seem too incredible, too scary to be true. We dismiss the alarming bells, hoping for the best until it's too late. Of course, it's easy to judge in hindsight, but I'm sure Clint curses himself every day for that fatal mistake. He will have to live with this burden for the rest of his life. Clint, still not believing his ears, asked his mother in despair, "Do you really want me to shoot Drew?" This question seemed to only enrage her even more. She simply hung up, leaving Clint completely bewildered, and dialed 911 instead. As it turned out later, this call was a fatal mistake. Holly's mother was calling from her work number, so she was connected to the police department of another county. Every lost minute gave the perpetrator more time to cover his tracks and escape with Holly. This bureaucratic confusion cost them precious time. While Clint was trying to figure out what was happening, events were unfolding at lightning speed. He ran to the window again, but it was too late. The stranger and Holly had already gotten into the car and disappeared in the direction of the nearest forest. Clint felt his heart sink. He knew that something had gone terribly wrong. It was only at this moment that Clint finally realized that the man he saw could not be Drew. He was much taller and more muscular. But due to the distance and in the semi-darkness, Clint still couldn't get a good look at him. He tried to call Holly, although he knew the chances of an answer were slim. And indeed, she did not answer. Meanwhile, Clint's mother, realizing her mistake with the call, contacted him again. She admitted that she had failed to reach the right police department and begged Clint to do it himself. Without wasting a second, Clint grabbed a shotgun and ran out into the yard. And then his gaze fell on something that made his blood run cold. Red spots were visible on the ground near the garage. Spots that were almost certainly Holly's blood. At that moment, the full horror of the situation finally gripped Clint. He realized that his sister was in terrible danger, and every second counted. With trembling hands, he dialed 911 and described the situation as clearly as possible. But even with all the desire, it took the police about 10 minutes to get to the remote Bobo family home. And in those 10 minutes, Holly and her abductor were long gone. Frankly, I can't help but think about how many opportunities to stop this tragedy were lost due to unfortunate misunderstandings and fatal coincidences. If only Clint had realized the danger earlier, if only the call had immediately reached the right department, if only the police had arrived even a few minutes earlier, maybe things would have turned out differently. I'll tell you how it is. We need to learn to trust our instincts, act quickly and decisively when we hear a cry for help. And no less important, we must ensure that our emergency response system works like clockwork, without delays and failures. Because believe me, when life is at stake, every second is precious. As soon as Holly was declared missing, the police launched a large-scale search. They combed every corner of the city and its environs, hoping to find at least some trace that would lead them to the girl or her abductor. But unfortunately, all their efforts were in vain. It seemed as if the earth had opened up and swallowed Holly without a trace. In a desperate attempt to find a clue, the police requested records of Holly's phone conversations. They hoped they could track her location using GPS data from her mobile phone. And indeed, this yielded the first fruits. They quickly determined that immediately after the abduction, Holly's phone was heading towards the woods near her house, exactly where, according to Clint, the car with Holly and her abductor had gone. Further traces led to Interstate 40, where Holly's phone stopped briefly. And then someone made a call from her number, and the phone started moving again, this time in the opposite direction, as if someone was deliberately trying to confuse the trail. I immediately suspected that this was an attempt by the kidnapper to divert suspicion and throw up smokescreens. An investigative team was immediately dispatched to the place where the last call was made. They hoped to find Holly there, or at least some evidence that would indicate her whereabouts, but they were bitterly disappointed. After a thorough search, they returned empty-handed, no trace of Holly, no clue as to where she might have disappeared. It was a dead end that threatened the investigation from the very beginning. In this situation, the police decided to rely on Clint's testimony, the only person who had caught a glimpse of the kidnapper. The young man described him as a tall, stocky man, about 6 feet tall and weighing under 200 pounds. Dark hair, a baseball cap, mossy oak camouflage, that's all Clint remembered. No special marks, no clues that could lead to the criminal's trail. Only a deep, loud voice, so loud that Clint could hear it even from a distance. The description provided by Clint seemed quite detailed at first glance. But as it turned out, in towns like Parsons, where hunting and outdoor recreation were commonplace, practically every second man fit this description. Height about 6 feet, weight under 200 pounds, dark hair, a baseball cap, and mossy oak camouflage within a 30-mile radius of the town. There were plenty of them. This negated any attempt to compile an accurate portrait of the suspect. But the police were not going to give up. They sent out search parties throughout Parsons and the surrounding area, hoping to stumble upon some evidence or witnesses that could help the investigation, and their efforts were not in vain. Very soon, Holly's personal belongings began to be found all over the town. Here and there, someone would come across her breakfast box, a receipt with her name on it, a postcard from the college where she was studying, as if someone had deliberately scattered them to mock the police and the girl's relatives. Moreover, according to some reports, even Holly's cell phone and her SIM card were found in the town. Although other sources claimed that these items, as well as the college postcard, were found in the woods near the Bobo home. In any case, these findings only confirmed the worst fears. Holly had not simply disappeared, she had become the victim of a brutal crime. The first person to come under suspicion was a local resident named Terry Britt, and no wonder Terry already had a criminal record and perfectly fit the description given by Clint. The investigators took him very seriously. They wiretapped his house, checked every corner of his possessions. But for better or worse, they found nothing suspicious. In the end, for lack of evidence, Britt had to be released. Days, weeks, months passed, and then years. It seemed that the Holly Bobo case had reached an impasse. No progress, no new leads. The girl's family still hoped for a miracle, but with each passing day, that hope faded. And then suddenly, in the fall of 2014, the unexpected happened. A group of mushroom pickers scouring the woods near Interstate 40 stumbled upon something terrifying. They immediately called the police, and then, unfortunately, only a few years later, the worst fears were confirmed. Among the autumn leaves and branches lay skeletal remains. Examination showed that these were the remains of Holly Bobo, who had disappeared 3 years earlier. I can't even imagine what Holly's family felt when they heard this news. 3 years of uncertainty, 3 years of hope, and then such a terrible denouement. It's something you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And although this discovery finally provided an answer to the question of what happened to Holly, it also meant that this investigation was no longer just a disappearance. Now it was a murder investigation. Of course, as soon as Holly's remains were found, the case took on a new scope. It would seem that the police had a new lead, a new chance to stumble upon the killer's trail. But as is often the case, it turned out to be not so simple. The place where the remains were found was popular with mushroom pickers and hunters. Hundreds of people could have passed through it over the course of 3 years, trampling potential evidence. Moreover, the wooded area and weather conditions had taken their toll. Most of the traces and prints that could have led to the perpetrator were hopelessly lost. It was another dead end that threatened to bury the truth about Holly's death forever. The place where Holly's remains were found turned out to be a remote patch of forest about 20 miles from her hometown of Darden. At first glance, it seemed an odd choice after all. There were plenty of secluded, deserted places around Darden. Why did the killer take us so far? Perhaps he was afraid that someone might accidentally stumble upon the body somewhere closer to town. When investigators reached out to the owner of this plot, he was not surprised. According to him, despite the remoteness and lack of trails, this place was popular with mushroom pickers. They often wandered these woods without special permission, so it's not surprising that it was the mushroom pickers who eventually stumbled upon Holly's remains. If not for chance, the truth about her fate might never have come to light. When forensic experts began to examine the fine site, a gruesome picture unfolded before them. Holly's bones were scattered over a fairly large area, as if someone or something had deliberately scattered them. But the most terrifying thing was something else. Judging by the hole in the skull, the girl had been killed by a shot to the head, executed in cold blood. It would seem that the discovery of the remains should have been a breakthrough in the investigation. But as it turned out, the police already had a prime suspect in mind and had been hunting him for at least 6 months prior to this. What's most strange is that this man was just one of 6 persons of interest in the Holly Bobo case. Yes, you heard that right, 6. And this is just the tip of the iceberg in this convoluted story. The first arrest in the Holly case took place back in March 2014, several months before her body was found. 3 men, Zach Adams, his brother Dylan, and their friend Jason, were detained on suspicion of involvement in the girl's disappearance. At that time, the investigation did not yet have a body, but there was already evidence of violent actions against Holly. Moreover, the deeper the investigators dug, the more horrifying the picture became. It turned out that before the murder, Holly had been subjected to sexual assault. It's hard to even imagine the horror this young girl had to endure in the last hours of her life. What kind of monsters could commit such an atrocity? But the shock of this revelation was quickly replaced by an even greater shock. After the trio of main suspects were brought in for questioning, police arrested 2 more individuals on suspicion that they had helped hide Holly's body after the murder. It appeared to be an entire criminal gang, and each of them played their own gruesome role in this tragedy. You know, in my years with the police, I've seen a lot of horrible things. But the story of Holly Bobo struck even me with its senseless cruelty, the audacity of the criminals who buried the body in the woods like some kind of garbage, and then led the investigation by the nose for months. It was something out of the most terrifying crime dramas, and at the same time entirely real. But the shocking twist didn't end there. As it later turned out, there was another suspect in this case, but he committed suicide before the police could interrogate him. Such an ominous detail which only added mystery to this whole story. Who was this man? What role did he play in Holly's disappearance? And why did he choose to take his own life rather than answer the investigators' questions? Even more intriguing was the fact that the police never disclosed why these 6 men ended up on the list of suspects. Perhaps it had to do with their past, some long-ago offenses or ties to the criminal world. Or perhaps the investigators simply didn't want to reveal all their cards so as not to harm the investigation. In any case, the details remained shrouded in mystery. The only thing that leaked to the press was that one of the suspects, Dylan Adams, Zach's brother, had previously had problems with the law. Back in 2014, he had been held liable for illegal possession of weapons. Not the best characteristic for a person suspected of involvement in a brutal murder. But of course, this alone was not enough to prove his guilt. During the interrogation, Dylan told something very interesting. He claimed that on the day of Holly's disappearance, he saw her alive at his brother Zach's house. Moreover, according to documents that later became the basis for a search, Dylan had allegedly witnessed Holly being held at Zach's house on that very April 13, 2011, the day of her disappearance. According to Dylan, he came to his brother's house that day to borrow a truck. But when he went inside, he saw Holly. She was sitting in a chair in the living room and looked very bad. And then something truly horrific happened. Zach allegedly confessed to Dylan that he had the girl and recorded it all on video. Of course, such a confession should have been a breakthrough in the investigation. But there were two problems. First, the video recording mentioned was never found, as if it had never existed. Second, Dylan himself later recanted his words. He began to claim that the investigators had pressured him and demanded that he slander his brother. And to be honest, it's not hard to believe some of the details of Dylan's story really didn't fit well with the other evidence in the case. The only thing that confirmed his words was the clothes that Zach was allegedly wearing that day. Dylan mentioned that his brother was in camouflage, and this matched the description given by the witness, Holly's brother Clint. The same description of a tall man in mossy oak camouflage who was talking to Holly in the garage shortly before her disappearance. It seemed that there really was some connection here. Overall, the situation was shaping up to be confusing and ambiguous. On the one hand, the police had serious suspicions about Zach Adams and his inner circle. Something clearly connected these people to Holly's disappearance and murder. But on the other hand, not all the confessions and testimonies seemed reliable. Some might be holding something back, while others might be adding extra details under pressure from the investigation. Unraveling this tangle and getting to the heart of the matter was oh so difficult. I'll be honest, at this stage of the investigation, my own head was spinning. So many versions, so many potential suspects, and yet no direct and unambiguous evidence. It would take a lot of effort and professionalism not to get lost in this maze, to sift the truth from the fiction, and finally bring the perpetrators to justice. And here we come to one of the most mysterious and disturbing details in this whole story. The same video that Dylan mentioned, the video that supposedly captured Zach Adams raping Holly Bobo. Of course, this immediately raised many questions and doubts. Was Dylan telling the truth? Or maybe he made up this story to divert suspicion from himself. Or maybe the video did exist, but someone made sure it disappeared forever. However, even without this video evidence, Dylan's testimony proved weighty enough for the police to take action. Based on his words, 3 main suspects in the case were arrested: Zach Adams, Jason Autry, and Shane Austin. 3 individuals who, according to the investigation, were directly involved in Holly's disappearance and murder. But the most ominous thing about all this was the fact that one of the suspects, Shane Austin, had already taken his own life by that point. He committed suicide before the police could bring official charges against him. Of course, this immediately raised new questions and suspicions. Could Shane not bear the burden of guilt? Or maybe he knew something he shouldn't have, and someone made sure he stayed silent forever. Be that as it may, now that Shane was dead, all eyes were on the other 2 suspects, Zach Adams and Jason Autry. It was their testimony that would now determine whether the investigation would finally be able to piece together a complete picture of what happened to Holly. And then there was another unexpected twist. It seems the police found a way to put pressure on Jason. They made it clear to him, if he didn't cooperate with the investigation, he risked spending the rest of his life behind bars. And I must say, this tactic worked. Soon Jason began to give testimony that seriously implicated Zach Adams. He offered to make a deal, information in exchange for a lighter sentence, and the police seemed ready to make that compromise. It was this moment when Jason began cooperating with the investigation that became a turning point in the entire case. Finally, there was a real chance to find out the truth about what happened to Holly Bobo. It seemed that just a little more, and all the pieces of this gruesome puzzle would fall into place. But as it turned out, not everyone was thrilled with this turn of events. The lawyer for the late Shane Austin reacted particularly sharply. A month before the trial began, he came out with a loud statement, accusing the police of bias and unprofessionalism. According to him, the investigators had no real evidence against Shane at all, just some theories, speculation, and rumors. Moreover, the lawyer claimed that the police had simply harassed Shane, threatened him, made him believe that he was going to be accused of a crime he did not commit. And allegedly, unable to withstand this pressure, Shane decided to take his own life. In fact, Shane's relatives, through their lawyer, accused the police of driving him to suicide. Of course, these statements made quite a stir. Although no official lawsuits were filed against the police, everyone understood that it was only a matter of time. The investigators' reputation was at stake, and if it turned out that they had indeed resorted to illegal methods of pressure, it could call into question the entire course of the investigation. I'll be frank, when I heard about these accusations, I felt quite a bit of unease. Of course, I trusted my colleagues and wanted to believe that they had acted strictly within the law. But I know all too well how dirty this business can be, especially when it comes to high-profile cases that attract the attention of the entire country. Sometimes, in the pursuit of results, people can cross the line of what is permissible. And if something like that happened in the case of Shane Austin, it could have very serious consequences. However, no matter what the lawyer said, the fact remained. Shane Austin was dead and 2 other suspects were in custody. And now everything depended on what Zach Adams and Jason Autry would tell. Finally, in September 2017, Zach Adams stood trial on charges of kidnapping, rape, and murder of Holly Bobo. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for 6 long years. The moment when it seemed that justice might finally be served. But as it turned out, this was only the beginning of new shocking revelations. Zach's defense immediately put forward an unexpected version. They claimed that Clint, Holly's brother, was actually acquainted with the suspects. Moreover, according to them, on the day of Holly's disappearance, Zach, Dylan, and their friend Jason came to the Bobo house, not at all to kidnap the girl. Allegedly, they intended to teach Clint himself to make methamphetamine. Jason, who by that time had already agreed to testify against Zach in exchange for a deal with the prosecution, told even more amazing things. Allegedly, during this lesson, Holly accidentally found out what her brother was doing and was shocked and frightened. So much so that she ran out of the house screaming the same screams that the neighbors heard and which prompted them to call the police. If you believe this version, it turns out that Clint knew a lot more from the beginning than he was saying. He knew what kind of people Zach, Dylan, and Jason were and what they were capable of. That's why he was so reluctant to intervene when he realized Holly was in trouble, because he was afraid for his own skin. And then, according to Jason, this is what happened. When Holly tried to escape, the suspects grabbed her and forcibly shoved her into the car. They took her to some abandoned barn, where they took turns raping her and then killed her. All so that she would keep quiet about their dark dealings. Of course, this is a very convenient version for Jason, which partially relieves him of responsibility. But there is one problem: Clint categorically denies that anything like that happened in their house that day. And there is no physical evidence to support Jason's words either. So why should the jury believe one criminal accusing another? Doesn't this sound like the usual rumors and slander that thugs resort to in order to save their own skin? And that's not all. If you compare Jason's testimony with what Dylan Adams told, you can see a lot of discrepancies and contradictions. It seems that each of them is telling their own version of events, and with a lot of blank spots and inconsistencies. Therefore, from everything I've heard, I can only draw one more or less reliable conclusion. Most likely, after the kidnapping, Holly was taken to the same barn that Jason mentioned, and there they did something terrible to her. And then when Zach, Dylan, and perhaps Jason himself realized that she was still alive, they decided to get rid of the witness. And Zach, as the ringleader of this gang, took on the role of executioner. He shot Holly in the back of the head, rolled her body up in a carpet, and drove it in his pickup truck to the woods near the highway. And then he threw the gun into a pond somewhere nearby so that the police would never find it. Of course, there is no direct evidence of this. There are only the words of one killer against another. But even that, it seems, was enough for the jury. Because when the trial finally took place in September 2017, Zach Adams was found guilty on all counts of kidnapping, rape, and murder. For the totality of crimes, he was given life without the right to parole. His brother Dylan, who allegedly only helped cover up the tracks, got 50 years, of which he will actually serve at least 35. As for Jason, who handed over his accomplices, he got off scot-free. The prosecutors dropped all charges against him supposedly. He did not take a direct part in the murder. However, I'm not sure that this is fair. After all, if even half of what these scumbags told about each other is true, then it turns out that they should all be behind bars. Every single one of them, because each of them, to one degree or another, was involved in this atrocity. But unfortunately, justice is not always perfect, and it's not always the one who committed the most serious crime who gets the most severe punishment. Sometimes those who are more guilty turn out to be more cunning than others and know how to divert suspicion from themselves in time by pointing the finger at someone else. Therefore, to be honest, I cannot say with any certainty that the final point has been put in the Holly Bobo case. There are too many dark spots and unclear moments in it, too tangled a web of lies, understatement, and mutual accusations. I do not exclude that there is something more behind all this, something that we still do not understand. These subhumans who didn't give a damn about someone else's life, who felt like having some fun and decided to play with someone else's fate like a toy. Cowards who valued their own skin above all else and therefore decided to permanently shut the mouth of the poor girl who simply found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yes, maybe some of them managed to escape the punishment they deserved. Maybe we will never know the whole truth about those events. But one thing I know for sure, the story of Holly Bobo should not remain just one of many criminal cases. It should be a reminder for all of us. A reminder of how fragile human life is, about how easy it is to take it away and how nothing can be done later to correct what has been done. But most importantly, a reminder that evil and indifference exist alongside us. They are lurking very close behind familiar faces, and so we must always be on guard to protect those we love. Holly Bobo deserved to live a long and happy life, but it was taken from her, and although we could not save her, we have no right to forget her. Every day of my work investigating another case, I think about her and about how much more evil there is in the world that needs to be fought. Dear viewers, if you have watched this far, know that you are simply the best. I am infinitely grateful to you because I tried very hard to make this material interesting for you. Perhaps you will like my next videos that will appear somewhere on your screen right now. And with that, I say goodbye to you. Take care of yourself and your loved ones, and trust your premonitions and instincts.